A few weeks ago, I discussed WWE wrestlers who I would personally like to see receive more of a push. And that video obviously caused some divisiveness as my picks are personal to me and people were asking where is the AEW version. Well, here it is. Today I'm discussing a few wrestlers in AEW who I am personally a fan of and think could be being used better by AEW. As always, these kinds of videos cause discussion and my picks are personal to me like I said, so sound off in the comments who you think in AEW deserves better, and let's begin this. Starting out with a guy who was part of the original AEW roster and on the first ever AEW show, but for the entirety of his AEW run hasn't been given any sort of push or direction. I am of course talking about Angelico. When AEW first formed and was announcing their roster and all their signings, I wasn't familiar with every single person that was signed to the company, but one person who I was familiar with and very excited to see had signed for AEW all the way back in 2019 was Angelico. Prior to AEW, Angelico had an awesome run in Lucha Underground where he did all sorts of crazy stuff and was one of the top stars in Lucha Underground. So I was very excited to see him in AEW. And he would make his AEW debut on the first ever AEW show as himself and Jack Evans as the Hybrid 2 would team up to face best friends in a losing effort in a really fun match and one of the more underrated AEW matches. And from here he would wrestle some more at Fight for the Fallen and on All Out on their pre-shows, both in losing efforts, which was sort of a signal of how Angelico was going to be used in AEW and early signs. And when AEW Dynamite began in October 2019, Angelico's appearances would only be occasional as he'd appear alongside Jack Evans every now and then, only just to lose. They were mostly used on AEW Dark instead, and they would get some more TV time when the pandemic hit and they joined the Hardy Family Office stable in 2020, but this was a jobber stable which didn't do anything for them, and when they were on TV, they were either appearing to do nothing or of course to lose. The HFO would dissolve in 2021 and Angelico would continue to team with Jack Evans as a jobber tag team before Jack Evans was let go from AEW in 2022. From here, Angelico would float around on his own for a bit before forming the Spanish Announce Project stable alongside Luther and Serpentico, maybe the most random stable in AEW history other than the Trustbusters. And nowadays you're most likely to see Angelico on Ring of Honor where he appears actually quite regularly and he still teams with Serpentico, and every now and then we'll also see him in singles action on AEW TV, and I always look forward to it and enjoy those appearances. And now obviously I get the AEW roster is stacked, but Angelico is genuinely one of my favourite guys in AEW, and though I would like to see him pushed obviously, I get that probably won't happen, but can we at least just see him wrestle on AEW TV more? He always puts on a great match, he's always reliable and consistent, and I'm glad I finally found an excuse to talk about Angelico on the channel, as like I said, he really is one of my favourites in AEW. Anyway, the point is, put the AEW World title on Angelico, Tony Khan, you coward. Lady Frost's first ever wrestling match was against Asuka on the 28th of March 2018 edition of WWE Monday Night Raw. She was enhancement talent and of course got squashed, but what a first match to have in your wrestling career. My personal introduction to Lady Frost though wasn't until 2021 when she started making appearances for the NWA, and by this point she'd been wrestling for just 3 years and was already a great worker in such a short amount of time and was leaps and bounds from her first match against Asuka. And I was instantly a fan of Lady Frost due to her aerial prowess and that beautiful corkscrew moonsault. And more would start to take notice to Lady Frost, and in November of 2021 she was signed to TNA. And Lady Frost's run in TNA was a short one and kind of a weird one. She did some cool stuff like being in the first ever Women's Ultimate X, but only after 5 months on the roster, she simply just stopped appearing on TV and on shows with nobody really knowing where she went, it. And it came out that Frost had requested her release from TNA as she was reportedly unhappy in the company for issues relating to her contract. Basically, she was on a paper appearance contract and she was hardly being used and wasn't able to work for other wrestling companies other than select indies. At first, TNA denied her release request that she made in June of 2022, and it wouldn't be until November when she was finally released from TNA. And straight out of TNA, she would start working for CMLL in Mexico, where she quickly became a fan favorite. And a few months later, in February 2023, she would make her first appearances for Ring of Honor, and eventually she would become a Ring of Honor regular and even start racking up some wins. This would lead to Lady Frost getting some occasional appearances on AEW TV whilst working Ring of Honor regularly, and she was quietly signed to AEW in October of 2023. Since then, she's continued on in Ring of Honor and made even more TV appearances, and her matches with Toni Storm and Stephanie Vaquer on AEW TV had fans impressed and asking her to get that All Elite graphic made. Lady Frost is someone I think should be near the top of the women's division, at least in Ring of Honor, and personally I like to see her win the TV title one day because I want to see her wrestling defending it every week. At the moment, she's kind of just floating and not really part of any storylines or programs, but I would like to see that change. I'd like to see her as a regular member on the AEW women's division. She's consistent, can put on a good match every week, and hear me out, imagine Lady Frost in the House of Black. Tell me that wouldn't be cool. Either way, I'm a big fan of Lady Frost and her ring work, and I think she can have some really good matches with people that she's yet to have faced. Lady Frost versus Chris Statlander, Lady Frost versus Hikaru Shida, Lady Frost versus Mercedes Moné. Give those to me. My first introduction to Konosuke Takeshita was during his AEW appearances in the spring of 2022. He even made a couple of AEW Dark appearances prior to this, and even before AEW, was known in his career for his run in Japanese wrestling company DDT as one of their top guys. During the spring of 2022, Konosuke Takeshita would go on a run on Dynamite for the next couple of months, where he worked great matches against the likes of Jay Lethal, Adam Page, Eddie Kingston, Jon Moxley, and Claudio Castagnoli. And instantly I became a fan of Takeshita and was drawn to the different type of aura he brought, and I was blown away by his in-ring ability and instantly recognized him as one of the best in-ring workers in AEW right now, despite not really having any sort of push. It was announced officially that Takeshita had signed in November for AEW, and from here, slowly but surely, things would pick up for Takeshita in AEW, and he would continue to get regular TV time for the next few months. Takeshita and his relationship with Kenny Omega and the Elite was a big narrative on TV for Takeshita, but this friendship exploded when Takeshita turned heel at Double or Nothing 2023, aligning with Don Callis and helping the Blackpool Combat Club defeat the Elite in Anarchy in the Arena. This looked to be a new start for Takeshita and finally a push, as this will lead to Takeshita to team with the Blackpool Combat Club in Blood and Guts against the Elite in a losing effort. Okay. After this though, Takeshita would get two big wins on pay-per-view though, as he won back-to-back matches at All In and All Out, beating Kenny Omega in singles action on the latter. But after this, there was no follow-up, and they seemed to lose direction with Takeshita, as he simply just became a body in the Don Callis family versus Chris Jericho feud. A feud which even saw Chris Jericho beat Takeshita in his home promotion of DDT, a completely nonsensical booking decision. And of course, this was a Chris Jericho feud that went on for far too long and was more of a net negative for Konosuke Takeshita. And since then, up until this point, nothing meaningful has been done with Takeshita in AEW, as he just continues to be a body in the Don Callis family. He had a great match with Will Ospreay at Revolution this year in a singles match, and after went to New Japan to compete in the G1, where from the looks of it, he was actually treated as a star. But when he came back to AEW, he returned on Rampage, which, nothing wrong with Rampage, but it kinda tells you everything with Takeshita in AEW. Listen, they need to turn it around with Takeshita. He is still young and a star for years to come potentially, and AEW needs to start getting these next generation of top guys in order, as these current AEW top guys are getting older in age. Bryan Danielson's retiring soon, Kenny Omega is banged up and probably only has a couple years left, and other top guys in AEW aren't getting any younger either, so AEW needs to start setting up the next class of main eventers, and they've not really done that with anyone other than Swerve, Ospreay, and maybe MJF. It's very important though that Takeshita is up there with them though, as they have one of the best wrestlers in the world with Takeshita, and they're not doing near enough with him right now, and we simply just can't let AEW continue to get away with this tomfoolery. The guy is a future world champion. Guys, that's it from me for this video. Like I said, these kinds of videos are always very opinionated and personal to me, but Angelico, Lady Frost, and Konosuke Takeshita are three wrestlers I really like, really rate, and really enjoy, and when you enjoy a wrestler and like a wrestler, you obviously want to see them get pushed more. But either way, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like it if you did, and comment down below who you want to see be pushed in AEW. Subscribe to Top 10 Wrestling for more wrestling content. I'll see you all soon, goodbye, and keep on rolling.